last video of this series, we're going to look at other data table settings. So just to get you an idea of what I'm talking about, in the builder, I don't want you to get confused. In the builder, I provided a lot of default options for you to control with the UI. But if you want to modify the way the data tables report works, you need to know where to do that, okay? So when we come into the JS function area, what we're talking about is this section in here. In particularly after the word data, we have set some elements in here that tell us how to control the interface or how the data tables report works. What we're talking about here is if you find additional criteria that you want to add to your report, you need to do it in this section. Okay, let's just look at what I give you control over now. Just to review, the builder is a tool I provided for you. It's not data tables related. I'm just trying to show you how when you change something here, it impacts your report and make it easy for people. There's two things in here that we haven't covered yet. The name is simply just gives you the ability to call the particular report on your screen a name. And sometimes on the internet, it might be called my example or DTable or whatever. I just allow you to name it for two reasons. One, you can do whatever you want and call it ever. But if you have two reports on the page, you're going to need to call them something different. Like if you end up saying, hey, table A, table B, you need to be able to point to those so that the controls know which one it's talking to. And then this other option is called the fixed header. I've shown you this before in the libraries series video, where I prefer to have the column headers stable at the top so that you can see what you're looking at all the way through. And because as a developer, I wanted that to be a part of every default layout, I added it here so that I could toggle it on and off and show you how that works. But in order for this feature to work, I needed to have that library extension, and we loaded that in the series before. So sometimes when you load an option or setting and it doesn't work, you have to look at the documentation and go, oh my goodness, does this also require a special extension in our library? And we've learned how to add those, but we'll practice that one more time in the demo. All right, just so you guys are aware of all the options, and there are a ton of options that you can read into. This is the site that you can go to on DataTables, and I'm just giving you an outline here of all the little different categories of things you can change. DataTables features, you can add buttons, anything that you like. Do I want to have scrolling options? Do I want to have some save state? Do I want to row reorder? What do I want to do? You can kind of look at the documentation here and say, okay, if I add this to this section here, then I can control my widget a different way. So just to give you a reference, go here. But what we're going to do in the demo is kind of go through some examples so you know how to do this yourself. All right. When we get to the demo, we're going to go through these examples here, but I'll quickly go through what I mean. So an example is we want to enable the fixed header with default values. I've already done that. That is the exact same thing I'll show you here is I've enabled the fixed headers and I've set it to true. So I wanted to point out that is a feature that we can certainly do, but I added it in addition to the normal out of the box standard stuff. Oops, all right. And then here's another option, disable the information display. We're going to go ahead and do that. So, you know, showing page one of whatever, we're going to toggle that off. It is not something I set up in the tool. I did that on purpose so that you could say, okay, she has these as controls that I can change, but she doesn't have this one. If I needed to do it, I want you to be able to practice both ways. In case you don't have the tool and you have to look at somebody else's code and just go, okay, I get what the settings are and I know how to fix these. What we're going to do is we're going to also modify that info. We can go into the details and say, instead of showing what it wants, we're going to show it a different way. And we're also going to show you how to turn the scroll feature on and off. So does the window allow us to scroll? And if so, can we set the dimensions of that scroll? And then there's a couple other features like collapsing the window, keep it in a certain area. And then finally, we're going to end with a row reorder and try to do a feature here to show you another feature you can add that requires an extension. So we'll practice. All right, we're going to hop over to the demo and go through these items and see if you can learn a little bit along with me too. We are in the final demo of this series, 2.6, other data table settings. Let's go ahead and hit our quick start. The previous lesson covered the page length options that we had at the top. Now we're just going to look at some oddball things, some things that you have to understand where these other settings that as we evolve get modified and how you do your research to be able to edit those and make your report your own. Let's just duplicate our report like normal. Okay, actions, duplicate the record. Let's name this 2.6. Let's clear that out. Let it come back in, and we are doing other data tables settings. Everything else can stay the same, and we'll close this. Okay, what I want to show you first is, and we're in the preview tab, and everything looks great. If I go to the to the function tab, what I want to show you is that data tables will work basically without any of these settings that I've been showing you. For the purposes of what we're going to do, I want to actually delete everything up here that we've been talking about here. And then I'm also going to remove this comma here behind the word data. So just so you can see, we should have very little information here. We have the word columns with a comma and data, and then nothing after that. Let's go see what that happens, what that does to our actual build. Remember, we've changed nothing about our data. We've changed nothing about our columns, our CSS. The only thing we're doing is in the JS function, we have removed the settings that we had already built. Okay, look at this. So we are basically a standard data tables out of the box. It's got the length, the search, the information, and the page. Those are its defaults. And it's got our data in the center with 10 entries. So it works. We wouldn't have to do anything that we're doing right now, but I wanted to prove to you that now you know where you can control all of this stuff. So let's go back and start editing what we were talking about in the demo or the presentation about, how should I say this? All the things that I want to show you how we would manually change it if you didn't have the builder. So before I do that, do you see, I'm going to start scrolling here, and actually I'm going to change this to be 100 records. And you remember the fixed header thing that we talked about? This is here. It's gone because I wiped that out, but it is still in my library because that is just something that is coming out of the version I have. So if I go back to my JS function behind the word data, so every time you add a new thing, put a comma there so that you can separate it. We are going to do fixed header true. So I'm manually typing that in there right now because we're not pretending we have the builder. So I go to preview and I'll change it back to 100 entries and watch that it sticks. So I manually typed it. You don't need to have that control through the builder. All right, so we have that feature done. What we are looking to do now, as one of our example, is to disable that information display. So that is written by this info and then the word false. By telling the system, do not show info, we're basically removing it from the screen. So let's go to the preview and look at that. Under preview, whoops, nothing worked. Why? I'm probably missing some kind of punctuation. So let's go to the JS function. Every time I enter a new one, a simple comma can screw it up. So just look, I added a comma after my last entry and I'm going to preview. And there it's there, but the info is gone. I'm just going to turn it on so I can show you guys that you can manually control this. By default, it's on, but you can shut it off, okay? All right, so let's do the next step. I think the next step is to change this. Instead of saying showing 1 to 10 of 500 entries, we're going to change it to another setting that DataTables has in this documentation. So right here under the info tab, we're saying true, but so let's put a comma behind this. And we're going to type this word language with a semicolon, and we're going to give it a bracket to give it multiple options. And in this case, I'm just going to say the info that we want to display is showing, and then I'm going to change page, and then the DataTables keyword is this, and I'm taking this from the documentation. All right, let's see if I get that right. And then I'm going to end this with a curly bracket. I haven't ever done this before, so just preparing for this tutorial, I'm like, okay, that's a neat feature. I might use that in mine. It's not something I have in the builder, but it is standard. So let's go take a look and see what that looks like. Sweet. Showing one of, I don't like my spacing. So let's go fix that. Showing one page. I think I need to just, let's see, add, oops, not right there. Correct my, let's see that. See if that looks better. And go to the preview tab. Perfect. So that's how easy it is to change the display. And so it might be something like, you could be really specific to your needs. It could be record, page, table contents, whatever words you want to use, or nothing at all. It could just be page 1 of 50. So use the documentation to change that. All right, we have another example here. Let's put a comma after that. And let's do scrolling. So let's turn on scrolling for the Y, and let's set it to a height of 400. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Do you see how it shrunk? Especially if I go to 100, it doesn't. It basically just now says you have to, this DataTables report has to fit in the box. All right, let's see. Okay, maybe that's just a little bit too small. I'm going to change it to a 500. Let's change it to 500. Okay. And what does that look like? All right, now I've got a little bit bigger. You may want to use this in the feature where you have limited space and you want it to fit exactly in a certain dimension. Okay, let's see. I think there's one other feature here. I want to show you this one. If I started typing in and I was looking for anybody named Steve, this one, this setting that I'm going to show you next, you see how the data table still stays that big? There's another feature that I have that we can try, and it's called scroll collapse. And all of this comes from the documentation. I have never used these before. We're doing it together. And scroll collapse true. Like, make sure I have my comma behind the last one I did. And I'm going to go over here and we're going to reset that. Okay, so here's my width, but let's do that again. I think I was searching for Steven or something. Do you see the difference? Do you see how the data table itself all collapsed up? That was what that feature does. As the data table shrinks in data, the whole report shrinks. So if that is the feature you need, then that's where you go with this too. And then I think the last one we're going to talk about is called row reorder. And what that's going to do is, like, if I took this and I wanted to drag it up and reposition something or allow the user to do that, I would need that feature. So we're going to go over to our function. We're going to add one more thing. So let's put a comma behind that one. And this one we're going to call row reorder true. I don't need a comma after that because I have nothing following it. All right. I know there's nothing happening here because when I go look at the documentation for row reorder, it actually needs to have its own library extension. So in order to do that, we need to come in here and add something. So I'm going to quick grab that for you and show you what that looks like. Okay, let me show you what I did so you guys can follow along. I went to the DataTables.net download release, which we covered earlier in the libraries. I know that I'm using Bootstrap 5 as my CSS, so I selected that option. And what I was trying to do was the row reorder extension. So by clicking this, I get down to that option. What I need to do is copy this URL for the CSS, and I'll copy the JS for this, and added them to my builder so that I can actually see this function work. Okay, so let's go to the libraries tab and I'll show you what I did. This optional CSS extensions right here. Remember, I used to have fixed header. Now I have row reorder. So I added that link to this extension, and under the optional JavaScript, before I had this one, and now I've added this one. So as you want to add additional extensions to your file, add them here, make sure they work, and then you're good to go. All right, so remember I turned on row reorder to true. What does that actually do? So here we are. I've got the library loaded. I've got it set to yes. Watch this. If I select this row, I can move it up here. That's what row reorder does. If I select this and move it down here, that's what it does. So if I go back and I turn row reorder to false, come over here, preview it, try to do it, doesn't work. Even though I have the extension loaded, I need to have them both corresponding together to say, I have the extension library loaded and I have it activated in order for it to work. So let me just quickly go back and turn that on. Prove it one more time. We can move things around. And there you go. All right, we have finished our series on the JS function, mainly talking about how we can control the way DataTables works with the user, what we allow it to see, and how the users can control things. In the next series, we are going to look at columns, which are basically the guts of this report and how the order appears, the naming, whether we can search on that field. We're going to look at a tool called the Columns Builder and get you guys familiar with customizing a report based on your stakeholders' needs. See you then.